Hello. Cloud computing is now a mainstream phenomenon. Everyone's doing it, enterprises, large and small. But what happens when a company is buying a range of cloud services from a number of different providers? How can those services be made to interoperate well together? We asked a range of industry heavyweights for their views of potential solutions. But first, let's hear why they think we need cloud interoperability and what it means in practice.
I think we need cloud interoperability because most enterprises today are fearful of lock-in. So I think there's a true pain point there in terms of when enterprises start to think about moving workloads into the cloud. And I think it's starting to be a real pain.
Again, depending on the definition of cloud, interoperability is a must at various layers. You start with public cloud, your applications need to be interoperable. You start with private cloud, your infrastructure and your services that tie the infrastructure need to be interoperable, right? And you talk about just a hybrid, everything has to be interoperable. So the role of interoperability in any sort of cloud is critical.
So the challenge really is today, enterprises cannot put their critical business applications in the cloud reliably because they have to rely on public internet. So that means they're not going to get the performance and the security and the quality of experience that they really need to effectively use those critical business applications and drive their business forward. And so what happens is that these enterprises end up going to the carriers and asking for a managed service so they can get that performance and security. The problem, this is where the problem enters. When the carriers work with the different cloud service providers, they have to work with the proprietary interfaces of those cloud service providers, which means there's a lot of manual work and there's a lot of custom integration, and so the enterprise suffers because they have to wait for the provisioning of that managed service. And then the enterprise also suffers because then they're even more locked in to that cloud service provider and the proprietary services that are offered by that cloud service provider, which inhibits that ability of that enterprise to innovate if something comes along from another cloud service provider or better pricing comes along for another cloud service provider. So it's the combination of those two things, the inability to quickly provision the managed network service and also the challenge of getting locked into a particular cloud service provider.
Cloud interoperability is mainly being driven by the enterprises and carriers that want to access the capabilities that the cloud will provide. A lot of technology today in the SDN and NFV world is a lot of interesting technology and a lot of research going on right now with some development. But wide adoption of those services and those features will not really be accessible until it's consumable by a wider audience. And those wider audiences require being able to plug and play things a lot easier, just like you and I do with our devices at home. In order to massively adopt cloud technology, you need to be able to move between cloud, between services, between technology without a major overhaul. The last thing anybody wants now is a forklift out of an old network to bring in a new one. So cloud interoperability is being driven by the consumers of the cloud and forcing the cloud and the vendors and the virtual platforms to create some type of common way to achieve the services and promises that the cloud will provide.
Okay, but what are the challenges involved?
I think the challenge is getting folks involved, right? So building an ecosystem that enables standards to take place. A lot of the service providers, especially the larger ones, have sort of an asymmetric motivation to actually truly get behind standards, in that it obviously would impact their revenue longer term. So I just think the difficulty is getting the right service providers in place to enforce standards.
Okay, and why would a cloud provider want to adhere to standards anyway when they can make more money by locking their customers in?
I think that's a great question, and probably one that will truly impact the uptake of standards short term, but longer term, I think customers will demand that service providers have interoperability standards.
And finally, when do you think we'll achieve this fully connected cloud we're talking about?
I think it's probably a way off. I don't have a crystal ball, but I would say, anywhere between the 5 to 7 years. I think it's going to take time. It's going to take time for enterprises to really have the pain that will drive more interest from service providers to get behind and really enforce interoperability standards.
The biggest challenges is when existing vendors drag their feet in opening up the interfaces, just because they can lock the customer in and provide a proprietary technology in the name of innovation. And I'm here to say, innovation occurs 95% of the time outside the company, so just enable that. That's what we believe in at Dell.
And given that a cloud provider can always make more money by locking customers in, why would they want to adhere to standards?
You can earn more money for the short term, but eventually there will be an ecosystem around you that will put you out of business. I mean, imagine, 20 years ago, there were mainframes. There's none today. x86 and the standard disaggregation has taken over. We expect networking and cloud to be following the same suite.
Okay, and finally, when do you think we'll achieve this fully connected cloud?
It's a layered approach on connectivity, right? We have achieved the fully connected cloud at the Ethernet and the optical layer, right? Check. With SDN and NFV, you are getting it one layer higher in terms of the connectivity layer, right? So almost half a check. As far as services are concerned, they may not be fully interoperable, but as long as the user interface is consistent, then you can have tools that can put services and applications to be ported across different clouds, so the user does not feel that it is full interoperability, but the experience is the same.
I think the challenges are really that there's so many different constituents. You have the cloud service providers. There's lots of different cloud service providers. They can provide infrastructure as a service, or they can provide software as a service, and their expertise is really around that specific domain. So whether it's a particular application or a compute and storage, they won't necessarily understand or know the network piece. And then they have to deal with a different entity for the network piece, another group for the data center piece. One of our members, one of our major service provider members, said that for them to deploy any cloud service for an enterprise, often they'll have to work with 5 to 6 data center providers, 30 to 40 software providers, and 30 to 40 different network equipment providers. So at the end of and everybody's speaking a slightly different language, even when referring to the same things. And this person from the service provider said, we waste 40 hours a week sometimes just trying to understand each other. So that's just trying to understand each other, let alone the challenge of actually doing the custom integration and doing the provisioning of the service.
I think the biggest challenge to making cloud interoperability happen is there's too many cooks in the kitchen. You have a lot of the providers and carriers wanting to protect their IP and creating proprietary systems. That's great. It showcases their capability, but it doesn't achieve what the end user wants, the enterprises ultimately. So the biggest challenge is getting everybody to agree on something common. And this isn't a new problem. Even with technology, legacy, traditional technology, going through IEEE, it always was a battle. It was a decision by committee. And it would take years to go through before everybody agreed. But companies like Cisco and Juniper would create their own variants, and one of those would generally win, and that would then become a standard. So I think that is the biggest challenge today.
But why would a cloud provider want to adhere to standards when they can make more money by locking customers in?
You can earn more money for the short term, but eventually there will be an ecosystem around you that will put you out of business. I mean, imagine, 20 years ago, there were mainframes. There's none today. x86 and the standard disaggregation has taken over. We expect networking and cloud to be following the same suite.
I think that is their preference. If they can lock in the customers and continue to make money off of that customer for years to come, that's a great situation to be in. And I think we see this land grab going on by the major cloud service providers. The number of decreases in pricing for a particular cloud service, it's just amazing how many times that happens every month or every year or every month. So I think in general the cloud service providers would prefer to keep it this way. The enterprises are the ones who will want to change this. And I think right now the enterprises are really just generally benefiting from this cloud services, these software as a service, this infrastructure as a service, and they're not always aware or understand the risks associated with building themselves on top of these proprietary services and getting locked in. Because in the future, my belief is that more and more of the traditional enterprises that we know and love are going to be transformed into the Ubers of the world and the Facebooks of the world, that these cloud technologies are going to be critical for any business to differentiate and innovate and compete. And as a result of that, I think it's really key for them to push for standards bodies like ourselves such that they can have a viable alternative where they have the flexibility and the control of what cloud service provider they use. So within our member base, within OpenCloud Connect, we do have some cloud service providers, for example, Verizon, Terramark. And if enterprises have a viable alternative where they can get the performance and security and the speed of the provisioning, they're going to take an open solution versus a proprietary solution. And hopefully that'll drive some of the other cloud service providers who have proprietary solutions today.
It's ultimately about flexibility. The end users want flexibility. Bring it back into the consumer world, we want flexibility to change our carrier service on our phone. If carrier A does not provide the quality that I want to be able to move to carrier B. And in the past, that was prevented. You couldn't move your phone number over. And that was vendor lock-in. They overcame that. And it's just historically, you overcome that if the demand is there. So cloud providers will want to lock people in and lock solutions into their proprietary mechanisms. But eventually, they'll have to break that mold. They'll keep that, and people will like that because it's a turnkey solution. It's managed. Everything is handed off. But from ultimate flexibility, cost savings, dual vendor, second vendor, the industry will force that to happen, and providers will offer a avenue for interoperability.
When do you think we'll achieve that fully connected cloud?
It's a layered approach on connectivity, right? We have achieved the fully connected cloud at the Ethernet and the optical layer, right? Check. With SDN and NFV, you are getting it one layer higher in terms of the connectivity layer, right? So almost half a check. As far as services are concerned, they may not be fully interoperable, but as long as the user interface is consistent, then you can have tools that can put services and applications to be ported across different clouds, so the user does not feel that it is full interoperability, but the experience is the same.
I think the cloud will always be connecting. I don't think there is a definition of done. It's a journey, not a destination for cloud connectivity. As we see a lot of, what we're focused on is the virtualizing of the network. Virtualized networks, it's mainly in the proof of concept phase now, moving more and more into deployment. But I would say we're a decade away from true cloud interoperability and plug and play connectivity.
So from the OCC perspective, I think we're looking at it from the perspective of the enterprise end user. And really, it's the ability for most enterprises to be able to say, I want this cloud service and I want it deployed in this way across my global enterprise with these characteristics around security and performance and regulations and other key requirements for that particular enterprise. And they have control over provisioning that based on the application that they care about. So I think that's the end goal that the OCC is looking to realize. And I think it's going to be at least 5 years.
So cloud computing is here to stay, and hopefully innovation will resolve all the interoperability issues.